All right, I need to share my screen. Ibrahim?
Oh, are you not a host anymore?
Yeah, I'm not hosting anymore.
Okay, so
I felt like I was missing some buttons.
okay, here I'll make you. There you go. So you should be good now.
Who's the host? Are you the host?
I'm the host.
All right, there we go. Share screen.
Cool. Just so everyone knows, we're recording and this is being live streamed on Facebook. So be mindful of how much you share of yourself.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So today, inshallah, we're going to talk about utensils. I should have gone there first and opened this up, right? Or removing impurities, I'm sorry. So there are different types of impurities that we're going to talk about. And over here, I'm going to mention the Ḥanbali madhāhib first on how they deal with the different types of impurities. So they're actually the strictest when it comes to dogs. And not only are they the strictest when it comes to dogs, they also equate dogs to pigs. So pigs and dogs, for our intents and purposes, are going to be dealt with in the same way. And over here, this is based on the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, إذا ولغ الكلب في إناء أحدكم فليغسله سبع مرات أولاهن بالتراب. Oh, and there are a whole bunch of different narrations revolving around 7 or 8, the strongest being 7. And there are a lot of scholars now that question, why is it that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam advised us to wash the vessels that we eat from with dirt, right? One of those times, 7 times, the first time with dirt, or one of those times with dirt, according to the different narrations. And wallahu alam, it would seem that the did we cover doubts and purity last week? Yes, we touched on it. I didn't go into too much detail concerning it. I just touched on it, and I shared a couple maxims concerning that. So over here, the reason that they use dirt is because of the absence of soap, right? So there are only 2 things that we find in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when they were when they would wash things or they would use things. So, for example, after you cleaned yourself, how was it that they removed the najasa from their hands? In our society, when we wash ourselves and when we clean ourselves, we use soap, right? This has become the norm across the world that we use soap. So my question would be like, okay, if in the absence of soap, like when I go camping, what do people generally use? They generally use dirt, right? Because the dirt takes away not only the major najasa or the larger pieces of impurities from my hand, it also removes the smell, right? And that's something important to keep in mind, because what happens with sand or with dirt, it actually scrubs away what's between the fingers, right? And that's the reason that we do that. So what the scholars or the Ḥanbali scholars actually said is that the capital A means Ḥanbali, right? Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So basically, H is Hanafi, M is Maliki, S is Shafi, and A is Hanbali. So what happens is that you need to remove that excess najasa, and you need to remove all of the remnants of it. To what extent? Inshallah, we'll definitely talk about that. But basically, you have to remove a majority of that impurity, and the way to do that is with this dirt, because it removes the major impurity. And then you wash, obviously, the dirt off. And when you remove the dirt, you've now removed the impurity that was with it, and you've removed the smell. The second group of animals that we have here is that any animal that is considered a cat or smaller is pure. And in addition, the sweat, saliva, or excrement of a larger animal, meaning larger than a cat, would also be considered pure. And you'll find that when we talk about the different madhāhib and how it is that they actually delineate and how they actually define the differences between animals or distance or length, you'll find that they'll have a very clear delineator. We had talked about this and we had touched on it very quickly in the first class when we talked about how to determine when an individual reaches adulthood. And we said that either it's going to be by event or if they reach a certain age. But you have to understand these lines are things that the scholars have defined in order to kind of help people define where they reach in when it comes to dealing with certain things and certain animals. So over here, basically, you have the Hanabila defining things greater than a cat and lesser than a cat. And I think that's a good way, an easy way to remember that. So, and they also say that all animals that are consumed are pure. So basically any animal that you consume, a goat, cow, sheep, not only is the animal pure, but the sweat, the saliva, and the excrement of the animal will also be considered pure. So a house cat would be clean, right? A lion would be larger. And not just that, and when we talk about it, any animal that hunts would also be considered impure, whether it be a bird of prey or whether it be an animal that hunts on the ground. So the Hanabila, they say that even with any animal that's impure, that you wash 7 times. Any animal that's impure, and we said that any animal that has 2 conditions, right? It's not consumed and it's larger than a house cat. Maybe I should put that in. I'll put in house cat. Jazakallah khair. So any animal that's consumed and is larger than a house cat, though that is not consumed and larger than a house cat, then all of those animals would be considered impure. The majority of the madhāhib, they say you only need to wash 1 time. You guys, excuse me 1 minute, please. I'm sorry. So now that's how they deal with dogs and pigs. Dogs, this is something that there's a large difference of opinion on, and the entire difference of opinion concerning dogs revolves around the purity of that dog. So the Malikis, they say that the dog is not impure. They say that the saliva is not impure and the sweat is not impure of that animal. The Hanafis, they say that just the saliva is impure and the sweat and the saliva is impure. This is according to the Shafi'iyya and the Hanabila. So we've got a couple questions. So animals that are smaller than a house cat that hunt. What animals are smaller than a house cat that hunt, or would be considered hunting animals, other than birds of prey? I can't think of any off the top of my head. If you guys have any,
neither can I.
I'm sorry.
I can't think of one, but I asked a question.
Okay.
Like a
I'm
small,
sorry.
like an iguana, not an iguana, but like a lizard of some sort, perhaps.
But even those are permissible to eat, and the only thing that they hunt, they generally hunt rodents, right, at the largest, right? So like mice and things. So even those would be considered permissible to consume.
A tarantula.
Tarantula is an insect, right? So I don't know if that would be considered a rodent, and if you're a Maliki, it would be okay. Anyway, I don't mean to sidetrack a lot. So the hair from an unslaughtered animal, we'll get to that, inshallah. The last, in animals are general or pure. This is the Maliki. So you'll find when it comes to spectrum of opinions that the Malikis are the most lenient. They're the most lenient, and the Hanabila, they are the most stringent. And just keep that in mind. In the middle, you'll find the Shafi'is and the Hanafis. So basically, the most loose with these conditions are going to be the Malikis. The most stringent are going to be the Ḥanbalis. And the reason that they say that animals in general are pure, and they say this recommendation from the Prophet ﷺ to wash 7 times, it was just meant to be in a religious sense, and it was not meant to be in a physical cleansing sense. It was more for like a spiritual purity, and it was a religious recommendation from the Prophet ﷺ. That's how they explain the hadith. So over here, this is basically a chart on how the different madhāhib deal with dog saliva, dog sweat, pig saliva, and pig sweat, and excrement. The one thing that you will see that is shared between all of them is that excrement is considered impure, right? They all see it to be impure. There's something that really stands out to me in this discussion, though. Do you guys have any questions on this specifically? Because if you don't, I have a question.
The pig sweat?
That is the question I had, right? Like, do these animals actually sweat, right? In what is the reason that this is even a point of discussion? So it turns out that pigs do not sweat at all. Like they sweat, but they sweat very little. And you'll find that this is the reason they actually spend so much time in the mud, right? That's the way that they cool off. In dogs, they only sweat from their paws. Like they don't actually sweat in their fur. So I just really found this a strange discussion, like in the fiqh books. And it just shows sometimes how removed you have the religious class from a lot of these, these biological sciences. It was just something that really stood out for me, and I really thought it was interesting. So, yeah, go ahead.
I had thought that this was a discussion because of whether or not if they touch you, it's impure or impure.
Yes.
So in that sense, but if whether or not they sweat, does that still make the touch pure or impure? Is that discussion still valid or no?
So I think that is the reason that they came up with this discussion. Because they couldn't figure out, okay, the physical animal itself, there's nothing to show that the physical animal itself is impure. So what did they say? Okay, well, there has to be something about those animals that makes them impure. It has to be the sweat, because all animals sweat. And why do all animals sweat? Because we sweat, right? And that wallahu alam, I would imagine that is the logic going into this. It's not like, they were dissecting pigs and dogs and determining where their sweat glands were, or how much it was that they actually sweat, or even the Arabs' interaction with pigs. Like, pigs were not something that were vastly present in Arab society. You'll find even when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited the consumption of pigs, it's not the same level of prohibition that you find him azza wa jal prohibiting alcohol, for example. And I think the reason for that is because the lack of prevalence of pigs. It wasn't something that was like a big deal for the Arabs. It was just like, it was just like telling them to grow their beards. It was something that they're already doing, and telling them not to eat pig is something that they already weren't consuming. So I don't think it was a big deal for them. I don't think there was a societal problem with pig consumption like there was with alcohol consumption, which is why you'll find that alcohol consumption was actually prohibited in stages versus the prohibition of pig, which was just a one-time thing.
Okay.
So according to the Ḥanbali, then if a dog touches you, then it's you're impure. Like that was impure.
Yeah.
But I thought they don't sweat through their skin, through their.
Yeah, they don't. That's the thing. So that's the thing that I was challenging. Like, okay, well, they don't sweat through their skin; they sweat through their paws. But if we assume that the reason that they are impure is because of the sweat, if it's the sweat that touches you, there are a number of issues that I also have with this. Okay, how much sweat am I going to see on my clothing before I even realize it's there? Right? In order for najasa to be valid, I have to actually see it, or I have to smell it in some way, shape, or form. And with the little amount of sweat that I find on both of these animals, not just dogs, on both of these animals, if they did touch me, I think there would be little to no chance that there would be very little chance that I would actually be able to determine if the sweat was on me. Versus saliva, right? Saliva is something that you feel that is imminent. It's something that happens immediately. And if any of you have had a dog or dealt with a dog, I mean, they salivate like crazy, right? So there's a lot of saliva in the dog, and that's something I think is very clear. Does that help?
Yes, but so if I were to pet a dog, would that be okay or not?
It depends on the madhāhib
Like
that you
from
follow.
the purity
In
Ḥanbali school.
the Ḥanbalis, as long as there's no sweat, right? So if you can actually determine that there's no sweat that has gotten on your hand, and I can tell you based on how biologically dogs sweat, you will not get any sweat on your hand if you pet a dog, and you will i.e. you will not have any najasa on your hands.
But in the book, it also says if the dog is wet, then and you touch it, then the najasa. So if like the dog jumps into a river, and then you decide to touch after that, then that's also.
Yeah. So why do you think that is? I ask.
I mean, because they say that the najasa is transmitted, I guess, and so the transmission is through it being wet. Basically.
Right. That's the thing. Basically, what they're saying, or the logic behind it, is now that the najasa of the sweat has mixed with the water that's on the dog itself. Does that make sense? So that's the entire logic behind it. Now you've just magnified the najasa, because remember, this also goes back to the discussion of the amount of water. How much water can the dog actually hold? Do you think it's more than or less than a qulla? Qulla is like, what did we say? Like 50 gallons or something?
Yeah, less for sure.
I mean, it has to be like unless it's like an absolutely monstrous, like, Clifford. I can't imagine it holding it that much water. And because of the amount of water would be less than that amount, any amount of impurity that mixes with it. What did we say? The Ḥanbali say about that?
It's impure.
It's impure, very simply, right? So if I have this cup full of water and there's a drop of urine that falls into this water, according to the Ḥanbalis, then this water would be impure. Regardless if the smell changed or the taste changed or the color changed, right? Regardless of that. So the same thing with the dog, and the same logic would apply there. I hope that helps clarify that, inshallah. So this is the summary concerning the saliva and the sweat. The interesting thing again about the discussion of all of this is the actual body of those animals pure, and wallahu alam, it would seem that all of them are agreement on that, like the body itself is pure. It is the sweat and the saliva that is problematic. But the Ḥanbali opinion and the Maliki opinion are the easiest. in these two. So just I think even if I ask you about the Ḥanbali opinion regarding dog or pigs or anything, the simple answer is going to be that it's impure. So now there are other impurities that we deal with on a daily basis. So over here I mentioned urine, and when I talk about urine, I'm talking about human, right? I'm talking about human urine. And the way that we deal with it is going to be very different. So if there is urine that you find on the floor, there are multiple ways of dealing with it, but the most common one comes in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ of the Bedouin who urinated in the corner, and the Prophet ﷺ, he asked for a dalu, he asked for a bucket of water. And on how you deal with it on clothing, even he ﷺ said, because sometimes after you use the bathroom, there will be backsplash, right? So you'll find spots of urine on your clothing, but the Prophet ﷺ, even for that, what did he say? He said, take water and spritz some water on your clothing, so that you don't have this waswasa, right? You don't have these common doubts about yourself that these things are happening, because the idea, again, to remove najasa, to remove impurity, the command was never meant in an absolute sense, right? You're always going to have trace amounts of impurity on your clothing, and there is a tolerance in the Sharia for those trace amounts. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. Those trace amounts are completely acceptable. You have other hadith to actually reinforce this idea. So a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ, and whenever they were on their cycle, they would actually use a particular undergarment, right? That was the same one that they would use every time. And they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, listen, we do the best that we can to clean it, but there are still some traces left on that garment. Meaning, regardless of how well they clean it, they would still find traces of their cyclic blood on it. And they said to the Prophet, like, well, we can't remove it. And he said, do the best you can. He said, clean it, and he said, scent it. Put some fragrance on it to cover up that scent, but do the best that you can, and you can continue praying in that garment, right? It's not a big deal if you continue to utilize that garment. And someone might ask, okay, well, if it's only for that time period, why is it that they would even have to pray with it? It would be either before they're starting, right, or when they're cycling out, right, when their cycle is ending. And those two time periods are very difficult to determine with precision. So you're talking about the beginning and the end of the cycle. You might start wearing the garment in preparation for the beginning of your cycle. So you're going to pray until you're sure, and then you're going to keep wearing it until you're sure that it finishes. So that's the time for that. There are some exceptions. So now a baby boy's urine who hasn't reached the age of fitam. Fitam is that where he's eating independently now, even if he's being breastfed. So I think that there's a very common misconception concerning this, that a baby just does not have to be on food entirely, right? So when a baby actually starts eating, that is considered a fitam. After that period, you cannot do rida. After that period, that child can no longer have a milk mother. So the milk, in order to be the milk mother of a child, it has to be before that time period, before the child starts actually eating independently, even if it's in addition to the milk's mother. So basically, in that time frame, there is I want to say a concession for baby boys. There's a concession for baby boys that you don't actually have to wash the urine off of you, right? If you get urine on you, you can actually spray water. But even that, there's a symbolic removal of that impurity. So even a baby boy's urine would still be considered impure. It's just the way that you deal with it is a little bit easier, because human urine in general is impure, whether it be man, woman, or child. The only difference is that they're a concession for baby boys. And the reason for that, and wallahu alam, is that with baby boys, you'll find that men, they tend to take them out more than they do their daughters, and within Arab culture anyway. And what happens is that people tend to play with they're a little rougher with baby boys than they are with girls. And this is just a socio-cultural thing. And because of they're rougher and they play more with them, there's more chance of the child actually urinating on those people. And wallahu alam, it would seem that this is the reason that this concession has been put in place. So you just have to wet the area. You don't actually have to soak it. So that, I hope that takes care of the baby. Madhi, this is before, so this is prostatic secretion. This is actually when a man is excited and before he ejaculates, right? So this is usually a clear fluid that comes out before a man ejaculates. This is something that the Hanabila, in majority, they say that it has to be washed. Wetting that area is not enough. All of this is based on the hadith of Ali radiallahu anhu, kana madhāhib, Like he used to have a lot of these secretions, and he asked the Prophet what should he do, and the Prophet said to wash himself and to make wudu every time he has that. Wadi is basically when an individual is ill, and again, these are more male focused. But when an individual is ill, usually what will happen is he'll have a secretion that comes out that it is not sexually related. It's related to, it's disease related. So it's more in the sense of pus. In that situation, he just has to wet it. He does not need to soak it. Blood. So blood. We're talking about generic blood now. We're not talking about menstrual blood. The Jumhur, all four madhāhib, including the Ḥanbalis, they say that it is impure. So drops of blood, of human blood, these are actually considered impure. They're considered najis. Small amounts, and this is the majority of the Hanabila, they say small amounts are acceptable, right? Small amounts are considered acceptable. If I get a drop of blood on my clothing, if I get a drop of blood on my prayer mat, I get a nosebleed, for example, that would still be considered impure. For example, if I wiped it off and I stopped, does it break your wudu or not? That's another issue. But if I get these small amounts of blood on my clothing, then the Hanbalis, they have an allowance for that. The Hanafis have an allowance for this as well. They have allowance for this as well. They say the amount of a dirham is about this big, right? So it's very similar to the Hanbali qawl in that it's a small amount. Small amount would be, it's a very subjective, term, versus the Hanafis where they defined it very clearly. Going against them is you have a number of the Zahiris, right? So there are a number of people who are literalists who say that blood is actually pure, and it is menstrual blood that is considered impure. So again, just something to know, something I want you guys to be aware of. But as far as the book is concerned, it is considered impure. So I'll take a quick pause here if there are any related questions. No? Okay. So dead animals. So if an animal dies, and when I talk about dead animals, I'm talking about carrion animals that either have died from natural causes, or they've been killed, by falling off a cliff, or they've been hunted and killed in that way. Those animals are all considered impure. I think this is something that is agreed upon between all madhāhib. And then if you wash the animal, right? If you wash that animal because you're using it to use the skin, or to use the horns, or to use the what do you call it? To use the hooves, because they have different uses. Then those are considered forgiven, right? Those things are considered forgiven. Those areas are actually not considered impure. So this actually leads us into the next section, which talks about, all right, how do you actually utilize a animal that died of natural causes, or an animal that has not been slaughtered? So you have a number of different opinions concerning that, inshallah, and we'll talk about that when we actually talk about utensils. How do you utilize this dead? Is it permissible to utilize a dead animal? Is it permissible to utilize an animal that hasn't been slaughtered? And there are parts of that animal that you can utilize, and a lot of it revolves around the discussion of what is considered connected to the animal, and what is considered a basic part of the animal. Washing what?
Dead animals.
The dead animal? No, it has to be with water. It has to be with water. The dirt is it's only for pigs and dogs in the Lahnaf.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and that's just one of the washings. It's not all of them. So you have 7 plus 1, or within the 7, 6 washings plus 1, depending on the madhab. And for the Hanbalis, it's 6 plus 1.
Jazakallah khair.
Ameen wa yak. So this is it for the discussion today. Are there any related questions, or something that you want me to go back over to clarify?
I have one. We talked about the male child. We talked about the term of child not eating yet. I was trying to better understand that concept. That means that the child has added something to the child's diet.
Yeah.
Other than breast milk, which can include breast milk.
Yes. So, and usually what happens is that you start weaning the child at about anywhere between 4 to 6 months.
Okay.
Meaning that the child is exclusively on breast milk for those 4 months. And then after that, you start introducing mashed peas, right? Carrots and all of these things. That is now the age of fitam. And the window now to feed that child is over. I mean the window in order for him to have a milk mother is over.
So no more ridat. So you're saying that you can't have milk siblings after that point?
No, you can't.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
In Sheikh Hatim's video, he had mentioned in terms of removing impurity that if you're not sure where exactly it was, you would basically kind of, I guess, cover that area in particular. And so here, I think you're mentioning to wet the area but not soaking. What do you define as wetting the area per se?
Wetting the area, there are two ways to do it. Either just and that's literally just taking water and just spraying water on it. Because versus soaking means actually pouring water into that space.
Okay.
So spraying water versus soaking.
Okay.
That would be my differentiation.
Okay.
And as for what you're talking about, this is when you get into a situation where you doubt which piece of garment is pure.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a whole entire discussion. Okay, if I have 7 garments and I'm sure one of them is clean, what am I supposed to do? Okay, well, I pray 7 times because I know one of them, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So those
like intense discussion.
You know, I mean, those are just, I mean, they're just more theoretical discussions. Nobody would actually do that, right? They'd just be like, you know what? It's easier for me to wash all of these. It's not, you know, nobody's going to pray 7 times. It's easier for them to be and use their time to wash those clothes than to go ahead and repeat those prayers so many times. Or if there's najasa on your clothing and you're not sure where the najasa is, okay, well, if I can't see, smell, or well, you wouldn't taste your clothing, obviously, but if I can't see or smell the najasa, then how can I be sure that the najasa is there? And is not the sun being used as a way to dry out particular clothing or garments, a way to purify them?
Mm-hmm.
So those trace, and even if you say, okay, even on top of that, trace amounts within the madhāhib, within the Ḥanbali madhāhib, are not trace amounts forgiven.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer to that.
Okay.
It's just, you know, those theoretical discussions, man, they're just so. It's like, you know, what if you have like 12 garments and like only 3 of them are pure? All right, no, you know, okay, so you would divide.
Yeah, I like the. I mean, because I was thinking like, I mean, like if something like if you were at work and like I don't know something happened, and you had some najasa on you, like I mean, it would be kind of awkward to walk around with like your pant leg like half soaked. Like,
it all boils down to, okay, how do you remove najasa? Because even in a workplace, for example, if I drop coffee on my shirt and somebody saw that I was taking a wet napkin and wiping it off, would that be considered socially acceptable?
Yes.
Right, it would. You know, nobody would bat an eye. And in all honesty, if anybody ever said like, yo, what's going on? It's like, dude, like I think and we've said this and we've heard this in our workplaces. Well, I think I stepped in some dog poop, or I think it's some smeared on my leg. So all of those I think are reasonable ways to, you know, get away with that. All right, the medhi discussion. So medhi it's a prostatic secretion, or what's there's another term for it too. Pre-ejaculatory fluid, I think, is the other word that's used. And basically what happens is that you wash your private area and you make wudu every time you have that problem, or every time you have that issue. And the majority of the madhāhib say that you have to wash. I'm not the madhāhib, I'm sorry. Within the Ḥanbali madhāb, you actually have to wash your undergarment, right? You actually have to wash your undergarment. And some of the later Ḥanbalis, they say that it's okay just to wet it. And we differentiated between wetting and soaking, between spraying and soaking, right? Spraying and actually pouring water over that space. So that would be the way to differentiate it, and Allah knows best.
What if it's dry, Sheikh?
Oh, if it's dried, same thing. You would do the same thing. You would still either you would soak it or you would spray it. One of the two. No, semen is different. Semen is considered pure within the madhab. So if there is semen on clothing and it's dried, or even if it's wet, the clothing would still be considered pure. The individual would be in a state of janaba. He would be in a state of sexual impurity, but that's a different discussion. We're just talking about the actual fluid itself is considered pure. If there aren't any more related questions, then now we can open the floor to unrelated questions, inshallah.
Can Ḥanbalis eat bugs and insects?
I don't know within the madhab, but I would imagine yes, because locusts were eaten during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and that is something that even Imam Ahmed mentions very clearly and categorically. So I imagine as long as they are socially acceptable bugs, meaning that something that's consumed within a particular society, I don't see that there would be an issue with that. You'd have like mealworms, for example. Mealworms have become more common than they were in the past.
Cricket protein.
Yeah.
Not the food of my people.
I would. If it was halal, I would just say.
No. I mean, the thing is, there are a number of things that were halal, but the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't eat them either, right? So there was lizard that was brought to him, lub, and he didn't eat it. So in Khalid, he asked him, he said, is it haram? And the Prophet ﷺ said no. He's like, it's not something that I'm familiar with and that I'm comfortable eating. So Khalid actually started eating it. I'm not a huge fan of eggplant, for example, even though
Me neither.
There's like a full, you know what I mean, there's a consensus that it's permissible.
But it's gross though. I get you.
I think baba ganoush I can handle, but eggplant but by itself, like untreated or just over a fire, I can't.
I don't know why anyone does.
May Allah guide them.
I mean,
it's not from Osama's madhab to eat vegetables.
Allahu Akbar.
Occasionally I make exceptions, but certainly not with eggplant.
So what is that meat diet?
My goal is to eat every halal animal, inshallah.
MashaAllah. May Allah make you successful in that.
Thank you.
Sheikh, I have a question. So, masalan, if I have, a small amount of water which has impure in it, and then, I can add another substance to reverse engineer it so that it can be, in a scientific term, we call it, it's a good water for me to drink now.
Yeah, like
So
water purification.
Yes. So will that now, can I use it to, make wudu?
Okay, this is a little bit of a ridiculous discussion. So please excuse me. You have now sanitization plants, right? So what they actually do is so that they take all of the wastewater, and this happens in a number of countries. And what they do is they take that wastewater, they purify it, and they actually incorporate it into some of the fresh water so that we can drink it. The end water is permissible to use. The end water is permissible to consume. The end water is permissible to make wudu with. The problem with this is that using najis water for the Muslim is not permissible. Does that make sense?
Repeat that again, Sheikh.
I know it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
So as long as the non-Muslims do it, it's okay.
Yeah. So basically, we as Muslims, we are not allowed to use things to benefit us. Like alcohol or najasa, or right, like any of these things. So you have things like, for example, red wine vinegar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, or white wine vinegar. What they do is they take alcohol, they take wine, and they just open it to the air. And when you open it to the air, it's the process. I forgot what the process is.
Fermentation.
No, fermentation is to turn it into alcohol. I think it's like called the pyruvic cycle, to actually turn it into vinegar. So what happens is that all of that alcohol turns into vinegar now. And when I go to the store, that red wine vinegar, I can actually buy it and I can use it and I can consume it. But I cannot be the one that made it, because the alcohol was haram.
Oh, so like if we could benefit, like if somebody else, like if we're at a lake or something, and someone brings one of those portable purifiers, you got to be like, hey buddy, can you purify this water for me?
No, the purification is different, because the lake water is pure in and of itself, right? The only reason that
assuming it's not, like assuming
if it's like a najis lake.
Or let's say like, the situation gets weird, you got to pee in a bottle, like, what I mean? It's survival mode.
It's
you
like
gotta be like, hey buddy, can you purify this for me?
What is this, like a water world situation?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, if you're in a water world situation, then al-daruratu bihal mahdurat.
Okay.
right? That it's a necessity at that point.
Use ocean water. What's wrong with you people?
Or ocean water. There we go. That's probably easier.
No, but you can't drink ocean water. You actually dehydrate and you'll die.
No, but that's what I'm saying. So can you purify it though?
Can you purify? Yeah, I mean, in a situation where you have nothing else to drink, obviously. But the question is now, like on a day-to-day basis, this is something that's done very regularly, right? The water that comes from our taps, a lot of it is mixed in with this treated water. And is it permissible to use that najis water now? And I know that there's a difference of opinion. But the thing is, if you start talking about things, it's been drunk several times. Yes. No, Ameen, akhi, Ameen. Wallahi, there are people who are dying from thirst, man. And it's really sad, especially the situation in Yemen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give them victory and bring peace back to the people of Yemen and give them access to water and food again. It really is sad. And even the water situation around the world, a lot of people, they talk about there's just a lack of fresh water, and we might come to a point where we're in dire need of these water treatment plants. Desalination plants have become a lot more common also. There are a number of projects going on with that, but just in general, is it permissible for the Muslim to use najasa? No, it's not. But can he use the end product of it if it's pure? Yes. That's okay, and he can utilize that, and Allah knows best.
If the whole world became Muslim, we'd have no more vinegar.
Allah. No, you would, but it would have to be made from the beginning. You wouldn't be able to make it. There'd be no more red wine vinegar or white wine vinegar.
Okay.
Or it'd have to be like a super unique situation. I'm sorry.
Can you talk about gelatin?
Gelatin. Oh, gelatin's a good one. So we'll talk about vinegar later for sure. We're going to talk about vinegar. We're going to talk about alcohol, and we're going to talk about the purity of alcohol later.
It should be random questions.
Yeah. The gelatin. So you have three madhāhib. You have basically three different opinions concerning gelatin and how to deal with it. If it had one opinion is that it has to come from slaughtered sources, right? So if the animal is slaughtered correctly, or if it's plant-based, then that gelatin is permissible to consume. The second opinion is that it has to come from animals that we would consume, meaning that we can eat cow gelatin, but we cannot eat pig gelatin. The third opinion is that it is permissible to eat any types of gelatin, and that is because it's gone through that chemical. So basically, the second one is like because it's come from a haram source, you cannot consume it. The third one is regardless of the source, just like the discussion with alcohol, just like the discussion with impure water. Even if it's come from a haram source, as long as there's a change that's there and there's a chemical change that is established, then it's also permissible to consume. And these are the three opinions that I'm aware of.
Are they? Is that last one like a major opinion?
That's based off a Lahiri opinion where that anything that is tanned, regardless whether it be pig or otherwise or dog even, then that tanned product is now permissible to consume. You have a number of madhāhib that talk about changing states. Now, so for example, if I burn lion excrement, right? So I have lion excrement and I burn it, it now becomes ash. The ruling on the ash is that it's no longer najis, it's pure, it's clean. The additional issue that we have with the gelatin is that it's actually consumed in the end. So you have people, who take those extra precautions, and you have some people who say no, because it's changed completely, I can consume it just like I can consume red wine vinegar.
Sheikh, are you eating gummy worms?
I will. That's one of those. What is the questions that you talk about? Risque questions.
I'm just saying, like, if you're about to tell me that the Ḥanbali perspective is I can start eating gummy worms, I'm really
it's actually not. That would be a Lahiri perspective. The Ḥanbali perspective, wallahu a'lam, a lot of the Ḥanbalis that I know, they would fall in the second category, where as long as the animal is okay for consumption, you can consume it yourself. Because not only was it permissible to consume initially before it was slaughtered, but there's also a chemical change which brings an additional change to it.
Is the Dhahiri school, like, would you say similar or connected to like a Salafi perspective?
You have a number of Salafis who are connected to it, but it doesn't represent the Salafi perspective. So the people who champion it, like Dawood al-Dhahiri, Ibn Hazm, or later on Shawkani, modern scholars like Albani, a lot of these individuals who are heavily influenced by the Zahiri school, you will find that they do not represent modern Salafi thought in terms of how to deal with Tawheed, in terms of how to deal with the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in terms of how they deal with the basis of Iman. So there's a huge disconnect, you know. So it's like, okay, we'll take from their fiqh, but we're going to reject their aqidah. Yeah.
Aqidah thing. Gotcha.
Ghumari, I thought he was Hanafi. Oh no, Ghumari, he's the one with Shi'i tendencies. Sahih Uthman?
Yes, later in his life.
Yeah. Okay.
But he is a Zahiri. He was a Malik and then he changed to be a Zahiri.
Okay.
Big jump.
But I mean, it's not uncommon. Ibn Hazm, same thing, you know. So you take it for what it is. Inshallah, from next week we'll actually be starting at 6:15. All right, we're not going to be starting at 6 o'clock because Maghrib is getting later. I'll make sure to put that in the group. Inshallah, like we said, the recordings will be made available for you guys, and I will. I think the PDF is updated, or no? Do I need to send an updated version? No. Yes. Maybe. Anyway, you guys can you guys can message me in the chat, inshallah. If we don't have any other questions, we'll stop here. والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليه والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
جزاك الله خيرا.